Hello and welcome back. Our topic for this video, we're going to start and introduce the concept of cellular injury. All right. There can be a number of etiologies associated with cellular injury, so there can be a lot of causes for cells to become injured. You can have things like loss of blood flow, which leads to a lack of oxygen. That loss of blood flow is the ischemia. The lack of oxygen is the hypoxia. There can be nutritional defects. You can have something associated, and these two kind of go together, with infection or immunity. You have an immune system that kind of functions abnormally, or if you have an infection that's causing the immune system to respond. There can be chemical damage, or there can be physical, mechanical type of damage to result in the cell being injured. All right. So we've got something that happens, right, externally that triggers our stress response. That stress response then can lead to adaptation. All right, so you might end up with a cell that changes function, and it remains as something that is adapted to a new situation. It's also possible that if we remove that stressor, things could go back to being our normal cell. But with injury or adaptation, if we go into that exhaustion stage, we now are triggering injury to the cell, potentially. All right? That injury essentially results in a disruption of the cell function. All right? That disruption or that injury can be reversible, meaning we remove this portion of it, cell can go back to being its normal happy cell. Okay? It can also be irreversible. All right? And the injury doesn't just have to be stress, right? We could also insert here if we end up having something like hypoxia. We've temporarily deprived the cell of oxygen. That's going to cause it to be injured. If the hypoxia is resolved, that can go back to being a normal cell. Okay? If it doesn't, if it crosses a threshold, we end up going into irreversible cell injury. All right? And this is where we end up causing processes to go wrong within the body. All right? That cell is damaged beyond its ability to function normally. The cell is then going to have two responses to that irreversible injury. It's either going to trigger apoptosis of the cell. That apoptosis you will also see as, sorry, I can spell, programmed cell death. And this overall is a clean process, meaning the cell that's injured is the only cell that's taken out, okay? The cell has mechanisms, and the tissues associated with the cell have mechanisms to determine when a cell has been injured beyond repair, and it will tell that cell essentially that it has to commit suicide and take itself out of the population. And we'll go a little bit more into detail in a future video about the process of apoptosis. But for now, apoptosis is that programmed cell death. It's a very clean way of dealing with cells that have been injured and removing them from the tissues. All right? We also could grow into necrosis. All right? Necrosis is a bit messy. You've got some collateral damage there. You're taking out cells next to it that maybe were healthy. And that's primarily because you have an inflammatory response that's associated with necrosis. That's one of the big differences between apoptosis and necrosis. Necrosis always has inflammation. Apoptosis, there's no inflammation associated with it, okay? That inflammation then can go to cause more damage. All right, and it can cause damage surrounding normal can cause damage to normal surrounding tissues or cells. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick overview of cellular injury. We'll go a little bit more into the etiology. I'm also going to talk more about apoptosis and necrosis, as well as the different types of reversible and irreversible cell injury. Thank you for your attention.